Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Jason moved into his dream home, a peaceful retreat far from HOA rules, he never expected his biggest battle would come from his neighbor, Karen. What began with a couple of cars on his driveway quickly spiraled into chaos involving sand mountains, legal showdowns, and a fight for his rights. Buckle up for this wild ride. Jason had always dreamed of escaping the confines of cookie-cutter suburban developments, and after years of meticulous planning and saving, his dream was finally realized. He found a stunning property in a quiet, picturesque neighborhood that boasted rolling hills, towering trees, and no homeowners association to dictate the color of his mailbox or the length of his grass. It was perfect. The house itself was a charming two-story craftsman with a sprawling driveway that could easily accommodate 10 cars. The spacious drive was one of the home's standout features, ideal for hosting friends, family, and storing both his car and his wife's. The property exuded peace and privacy, something Jason had yearned for after years of cramped apartment living. Jason and his wife settled in quickly, relishing their newfound freedom. He worked remotely as a software engineer, while his wife, a freelance photographer, found endless inspiration in the serene surroundings. Their mornings began with coffee on the porch, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. But this idyllic life came with its quirks. The neighborhood, while beautiful, was home to a mix of personalities. Most of the residents kept to themselves, maintaining a respectful distance. Yet, Jason had noticed a handful of neighbors whose habits suggested a slightly overbearing nature. Among them was a bronzed woman with an almost regal stride, accompanied by a tiny yapping dog. He had only seen her from afar, her piercing voice carrying through the stillness of the mornings. One crisp spring day, Jason's peaceful routine was interrupted. As he sipped his coffee and glanced out the window, his attention was caught by two unfamiliar cars parked squarely in his driveway, a black SUV and a silver sedan, both modest but clearly out of place. Confused, Jason put down his mug and walked outside to investigate. As he approached the vehicles, he couldn't help but wonder if it was a mistake. Perhaps the cars belonged to a delivery service or visitors to a neighbor. Yet, no one was in sight. Jason began inspecting the cars, searching for a note or some sign of explanation. Before he could piece together the puzzle, the faint clatter of heels echoed in the distance. Turning toward the sound, Jason saw her, the bronzed woman. She strode confidently up his driveway, her designer sunglasses perched high on her head, a small dog cradled in one arm. Her vibrant energy clashed with Jason's confusion. "Good morning, neighbor," she chirped with a radiant smile, as though they had been lifelong friends. She didn't stop at the driveway's edge, instead stepping onto Jason's property as if it were her own. Without hesitation, she climbed into the silver sedan, rolling down the window to continue the conversation. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she added cheerfully. "I'm Karen, and this is Sprinkles," she said, nodding toward the dog. "Sorry we didn't get to meet sooner. We've been vacationing in Cabo. Just got back yesterday." Jason stared at her, struggling to process her audacity. "Hi," he managed, keeping his tone polite. "I'm Jason. This is my property. Can I ask why these cars are parked here?" Karen laughed, waving a manicured hand. "Oh, these? One's mine and the other is my husband's. We've been parking here for years. The previous owners didn't mind, so I figured you wouldn't either. You have so much space." Jason blinked, incredulous. "This is private property. I don't mind meeting neighbors, but parking here without asking isn't appropriate. Could you please move your cars? I'd appreciate it." Karen tilted her head, as though Jason were the one behaving oddly. "Oh, come on, it's just a driveway. You've got plenty of room, and it's convenient for us. You're not going to be one of those neighbors, are you?" Jason felt his patience fraying. "It's not about the space. It's about respect. I'm asking you politely not to park here again." Karen's smile wavered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Well," she said, her voice clipped, "if you insist, but let's not start things off on the wrong foot. We're neighbors after all. I hope we can get along." With that, she started the sedan and reversed it out of the driveway. She parked it on the street, but made no move to remove the SUV. Jason watched her go, unsure whether to laugh at the absurdity of the encounter or feel concerned about what it might foreshadow. That night, he shared the bizarre interaction with his wife, who suggested that it might be an isolated incident. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's boldness wasn't a one-time thing. Something told him this was just the beginning. The next morning, Jason was hoping that his polite but firm conversation with Karen would be enough to settle the matter. Yet as he stepped outside to warm sunlight and the hum of birdsong, his optimism evaporated. The black SUV was still parked squarely on his driveway. Frustrated, Jason walked around the vehicle, noting the faint oil stains it had left on his once pristine concrete. His first instinct was to knock on Karen's door, but before he could make his way across the street, she appeared once again. This time clad in workout gear and holding her ever-present dog. "Morning," Karen called out, flashing an infuriatingly cheery smile. She strolled up without a trace of concern, as though they were old friends catching up over coffee. Jason wasted no time. "Karen, we talked about this yesterday. I thought I was clear that your cars can't stay parked here." Karen tilted her head, a faux innocent look spreading across her face. "Oh, this. My husband forgot to move it last night. You know how it is. Busy schedules, things slip the mind. Don't worry, we'll take care of it, eventually." Jason's jaw tightened. "I need it moved now. This isn't your property, and it's not appropriate to treat it as if it were." Karen sighed theatrically, as if Jason's request were some enormous burden. "I don't see why you're making such a fuss. The previous owners let us park here for years. We've gotten used to it. You have so much space, it's not like it's hurting anyone." Jason crossed his arms, unwilling to back down. "That was their decision. I'm the owner now, and I don't want anyone parking here without asking. It's a matter of principle and respect." Karen's cheery facade cracked for a moment, revealing a flash of irritation. "Respect works both ways, Jason. This is a community. Sometimes we need to make small compromises to keep things running smoothly." Jason's patience snapped. "Respect does work both ways, Karen, which is why I'm asking you again. Move the SUV and don't park here again without permission. Otherwise, I'll have to involve a tow truck." Karen scoffed, adjusting her sunglasses with a dismissive wave. "You wouldn't dare." But Jason dared. That afternoon, he called a local towing company, and within an hour, the black SUV was on its way to the impound lot. Jason watched from his window as the tow truck operator secured the vehicle. Karen nowhere in sight. The peace was short-lived. By evening, there was an aggressive knock on Jason's door. He opened it to find Karen, her husband, a broad-shouldered man with an angry scowl. And, of course, the ever-present dog. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The man barked before Jason could get a word in. "You had our car towed. Do you know how much it cost us to get it back?" Karen crossed her arms, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "You owe us $500, Jason. That's what we had to pay to retrieve our car. All because you couldn't be neighborly." Jason held his ground. "I warned you to move it, and you didn't. That's not my responsibility. You have no right to park on my property without permission." Karen jabbed a finger toward him, her tone turning venomous. "This isn't over. HOA rules allow us to park here. You're just being difficult." Jason blinked. "What rules?" "My property isn't even part of an HOA." Karen smirked, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. "Oh, it is. We've got documents to prove it." Jason took the paper and scanned it quickly. It was an HOA agreement, complete with boundary lines that supposedly included his property, yet something about it seemed off. The logo was strangely pixelated, and the dates didn't align with the development's history. "This doesn't make sense," Jason said, handing the paper back. "My realtor confirmed that my home isn't part of any HOA, and even if it were, this wouldn't justify parking on my private property." Karen shrugged dramatically. "Believe what you want, but you'll regret this. Mark my words." Jason closed the door on their heated stares, but his heart was pounding. He had no intention of backing down. That night, he took matters into his own hands. After an exhaustive online search, he ordered a full set of outdoor security cameras. If Karen wanted a fight, he'd be prepared. By the next evening, Jason had installed cameras along his driveway and perimeter. The crisp recordings gave him a sense of control over a situation spiraling into absurdity. But as he watched the footage of his now empty driveway from his phone, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Karen's parting words echoed in his mind. "You'll regret this." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Jason woke the next morning feeling a small sense of accomplishment. His cameras were up and running, his driveway was free of unwanted vehicles, and Karen's threats felt like little more than empty posturing. But as he stepped onto his porch with a fresh cup of coffee, that brief moment of peace shattered. The driveway he had so meticulously maintained was unrecognizable. Towering in its center was an enormous pile of sand, so massive it dwarfed his car, reaching nearly the second-story windows of his house. The mountain sprawled across the entire length of the driveway, cutting off any hope of exit. Jason stared in stunned silence, the reality sinking in like a punch to the gut. His car, parked closer to the garage, was half buried under the sand, its hood barely visible beneath the cascading grains. The meticulous landscaping surrounding the driveway had been destroyed, bushes flattened under the weight of the spill. His phone slipped from his hand as he stumbled forward. Jason grabbed a fistful of the sand, the gritty texture slipping through his fingers like an insult. Who would do this? The answer came almost immediately. Karen. Her smug face, her taunting threats, they all pointed to her. The roar of an engine snapped Jason's attention to the street. A black SUV, Karen's unmistakable vehicle, cruised past his house. She slowed as she reached the driveway, rolling down her window just enough to flash him a triumphant smirk before speeding away. Jason's blood boiled. His thoughts raced, replaying her words from the night before. "You'll regret this." She had made good on her promise. Before he could act, the sky began to darken. The clear morning gave way to ominous clouds, and a cool breeze signaled the onset of rain. Within minutes, the first drops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a full-blown downpour. Jason ran back to the porch as the torrential rain turned the mountain of sand into a cascading mess of mud. Streams of murky water flowed across his driveway, spilling onto the lawn and threatening to seep into his garage. His car, still partially trapped beneath the sand, was now coated in thick layers of muck. The sound of his neighbor's doors opening caught his attention. Several residents stepped outside, umbrellas in hand, their expressions a mix of shock and pity. One older man, Mr. Harvey, waved Jason over. "This is outrageous," Mr. Harvey shouted over the roar of rain. "Who would do such a thing?" Jason clenched his fists, water soaking through his clothes. "I have a pretty good idea," he muttered. Ignoring the rain, Jason sprinted back into the house and opened his security app. His cameras had recorded everything. Skimming through the footage from the night before, his worst suspicions were confirmed. Karen and her husband had arrived in the dead of night, their truck towing a massive dump trailer. Together, they unloaded the sand with precision, even laughing as they worked under the cover of darkness. Jason's hand trembled with anger as he paused on a frame of Karen standing in the beam of a floodlight, her smirk visible even in the grainy footage. He quickly downloaded the recordings and dialed the police. "I need to report an act of vandalism," he told the dispatcher, his voice tight with restrained fury. The rain raged on, turning his driveway into a muddy swamp as Jason waited for the authorities to arrive. He called his lawyer next, explaining the situation in detail and sending the video evidence as proof. By the time the police pulled up, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Jason greeted the officers, pointing them toward the mess in his driveway and explaining the events of the past few days. He provided the security footage, which they reviewed with somber expressions. "This is serious," one officer said. "We'll file a report and contact the individuals involved. You've got enough evidence here for legal action." Jason nodded grimly. "I'm pressing charges. This has gone too far." The officers left, promising to follow up, but Jason's ordeal was far from over. The sheer scale of the mess made immediate cleanup impossible. With the rain worsening the situation, he knew it would take days and a team of professionals to restore his driveway. As the rain resumed, Jason sat in his kitchen, staring out at the wreckage. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Proceeding with civil case. Keep documentation coming. Stay strong." Jason exhaled slowly. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. Karen had declared war, but she underestimated her opponent. This wasn't just about sand or even his driveway. This was about standing up for his rights, no matter how petty or vindictive the opposition. And Jason had every intention of winning. Jason was done playing defense. Karen's stunt with the sand pile wasn't just a petty act of revenge. It was a blatant attack on his property and his dignity. The ruined driveway, the damaged landscaping, and the humiliation of being targeted in such a brazen way fueled his resolve. It was time to fight back. The first thing Jason did was hire a crew to remove the mountain of sand. It wasn't an easy task. The torrential rain had turned the pile into a heavy, compacted mess, and it took 2 days of grueling work with loaders and dump trucks to clear it away. The cleanup cost him thousands, but Jason knew it was an essential first step in restoring order. While the crew worked, Jason got busy building his case. He carefully compiled all the evidence, the security camera footage, photographs of the damage, repair bills, and even written statements from neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath. He sent everything to his lawyer, who assured him that they had a strong foundation for a lawsuit. But Jason wasn't content to wait for the wheels of justice to turn. He wanted Karen to feel the consequences of her actions immediately. He reached out to the local police to follow up on the vandalism report, pushing for criminal charges. The officer assigned to the case was receptive, especially after reviewing the damning footage of Karen and her husband unloading the sand in the middle of the night. "You've got an open and shut case here," the officer told Jason. "This isn't just vandalism, it's also trespassing and destruction of property. We'll be moving forward with charges." Satisfied that the legal system was on his side, Jason decided to take additional precautions to protect his property. He expanded his security system, adding more cameras and floodlights to cover every angle of his driveway and yard. He also installed motion sensors that would send real-time alerts to his phone. The final piece of his plan was a conversation with the local media. Jason contacted a reporter from the town's newspaper, sharing the details of what had happened. He provided photos and videos, careful to frame the story as a cautionary tale about property rights and the lengths some people would go to assert control. Within days, the article was published, painting Karen and her husband in an unflattering light. The fallout was immediate. Jason noticed fewer cars parked in front of Karen's house, and her usual smug demeanor had vanished. She avoided eye contact whenever their paths crossed, though Jason could sense the simmering anger behind her silence. But Karen wasn't the only one paying attention. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began stopping by to express their support. "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this," one neighbor said. "What she did to you was outrageous. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." Jason appreciated the support, but he remained focused on the bigger picture. Karen had declared war, but she underestimated Jason's determination and resourcefulness. He wasn't just cleaning up his driveway. He was taking back his peace of mind and making it clear that his property was his sanctuary. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Jason felt like he was in control. The law was on his side, the community was behind him, and Karen's sense of untouchable entitlement had finally been shaken. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the scales of justice to tip in his favor. The courtroom was packed. Word of Karen's antics had spread through the neighborhood, and several residents had shown up to witness what promised to be a dramatic showdown. Jason sat at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer, a sharp and meticulous woman named Amanda Chase, beside him. Across the room, Karen and her husband looked decidedly less confident than usual. Karen's trademark smugness had been replaced by tight-lipped defiance, while her husband appeared nervous, constantly fidgeting with his tie. The judge entered, and the room fell silent as proceedings began. Jason's lawyer opened with a clear and damning presentation. Using the security footage as the cornerstone of their case, Amanda meticulously laid out the events leading up to the sand dumping incident. She played the video on a large screen for everyone to see. Karen and her husband unloading the massive pile, laughing as they worked. The evidence was irrefutable. Amanda followed the video with photographs of the damage, repair bills, and an itemized list of costs Jason had incurred. She also presented witness statements from neighbors who had seen Karen's SUV loitering around the property and heard her threats after the towing incident. "This was not a random act of vandalism," Amanda declared. "It was a calculated effort to intimidate and harm my client, Mr. Jason Calloway. Karen Bradshaw and her husband flagrantly violated private property, caused significant financial damage, and showed utter disregard for the law." Karen's lawyer attempted to downplay the incident, framing it as a petty neighborhood dispute that had escalated unnecessarily. "Yes, the actions may have been misguided," he conceded, "but they were hardly malicious. My clients believed they were acting within their rights as community members." But Amanda was ready. She pointed out the forged HOA documents Karen had tried to use as justification for her actions. A handwriting expert testified that the documents were doctored, further discrediting Karen's defense. When it was Karen's turn to testify, she tried to spin the narrative in her favor. She painted herself as a victim of Jason's unfriendly behavior, claiming he had overreacted to minor misunderstandings. Her husband, visibly uncomfortable, corroborated her story, though his hesitant tone did little to strengthen their case. Amanda's cross-examination was relentless. She cornered Karen on her contradictory statements and forced her to admit she had no legal claim over Jason's property. Mrs. Bradshaw, Amanda pressed, "Did you or did you not hire a truck to dump sand on Mr. Calloway's driveway?" Karen hesitated, but ultimately had no choice. "Yes," she muttered. "And did you or did you not laugh while doing so?" Amanda asked, playing the video again. Karen's silence was deafening. After several days of testimony and deliberation, the verdict was clear. The judge addressed Karen and her husband sternly. "Your actions were deliberate, reckless, and malicious. You trespassed on private property, falsified documents, and caused significant financial and emotional harm to Mr. Calloway. Such behavior cannot go unpunished." The ruling was a complete victory for Jason. The court ordered Karen and her husband to pay full restitution for the damages, including the cost of sand removal, landscaping repairs, and additional legal fees. But the punishment didn't stop there. Both Karen and her husband were sentenced to 6 months in jail for their actions, with the judge citing their lack of remorse as aggravating factors. As the gavel struck, Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Justice had been served, and Karen's reign of entitlement was over. Karen and her husband were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, their once commanding presence reduced to defeated silence. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt a sense of peace. The battle had been hard fought, but the victory was worth every effort. With the court ruling behind him, Jason finally began to feel a sense of closure. The immediate consequence of Karen's actions was her and her husband's imprisonment. Their 6-month jail sentence sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, serving as a stark reminder that no one was above the law. Karen's pristine home, once the epicenter of her self-proclaimed authority, now stood eerily quiet. The neighbors who had once tolerated her overbearing ways were vocal in their relief. Many approached Jason to apologize for not stepping in sooner or to offer their support. "Thank you for standing up to her," one elderly neighbor said, shaking Jason's hand. "We all lived under her shadow for too long." Beyond the neighborhood, the case garnered attention in the local press. The story of Jason's determination and Karen's downfall became a cautionary tale about the limits of entitlement and the importance of respecting property rights. Jason used the restitution money to restore his driveway and landscaping to their former glory. The team he hired worked tirelessly, and within a week, the scars left by Karen's actions were erased. The driveway gleamed under the morning sun, and fresh greenery lined its edges, making it look even better than before. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to change. Inspired by Jason's resolve, residents banded together to ensure something like this would never happen again. They organized meetings to discuss improving their sense of community without overstepping personal boundaries. Neighbors who had previously been isolated came together, sharing stories of Karen's intimidation tactics and vowing to foster a more inclusive environment. For Jason, the journey wasn't just about reclaiming his property, it was about reclaiming his peace of mind. Each time he pulled into his driveway, now secure with additional cameras and floodlights, he felt a renewed sense of pride. Karen's absence marked the end of an era for the neighborhood. It was no longer ruled by fear or manipulation, but by mutual respect. Though the scars of her actions would linger, the changes Jason had catalyzed promised a brighter future for everyone. Months after the trial, Jason's life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The chaos Karen had brought into his world now felt like a distant memory. Each morning, as he sipped his coffee on the porch, he looked out over his pristine driveway and restored landscaping, a symbol of the hard-won battle for his rights. The neighborhood, once divided and tense, had transformed. Jason had become something of a local hero, admired for standing up against Karen's tyranny. Neighbors who had previously avoided confrontation began to foster a stronger sense of community, hosting block parties and working together on shared projects. Jason's driveway, Once a battleground, now saw use for barbecues and gatherings. His neighbors, grateful for his perseverance, would stop by for a chat or drop off baked goods as a gesture of thanks. One sunny afternoon, Jason received an unexpected visitor, Mr. Harvey, the older neighbor who had offered his support during the sandpile fiasco. "You've done more than just fix your driveway, Jason," Mr. Harvey said, handing him a homemade pie. "You've fixed this neighborhood. We finally feel like a community again." The gratitude warmed Jason's heart. The ordeal, as exhausting as it had been, had brought about real change. Karen and her husband, now out of jail, had quietly sold their house and left the neighborhood. Their departure brought a sense of finality, closing the chapter on their reign of entitlement. Jason reflected on the journey. It hadn't been easy, nights of frustration, legal battles, and public scrutiny, but he had stood firm. He had proven that principles matter, that standing up to injustice, no matter how small or personal, could lead to something greater. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over his property, Jason felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His home was more than just a place to live. It was a testament to resilience, justice, and the power of fighting for what's right.